When I started realizing that the patterns that I was seeing in my relationships of abuse, verbal, physical, sexual, like all of these things were patterns that my mom too had faced. And the older I got and I started seeing this sequence, I was like, it's gonna take more than just awareness for me to break these chains. Like, I'm going to need God. My story before coming to Christ, honestly, is like a roller coaster. I've always been in church. I've grown up in church. I gave my life to Christ in like 2013. I think back then it was more so of I was just like yearning for a relationship from a father to a daughter. I didn't really know what or how deep that relationship could go. It was very much so surface level. So I wasn't in the streets back then, but I was on the sidewalk for sure. So I was kind of playing like this back and forth, not wanting to fully commit to my walk with God, but I always knew that He was there. I grew up in a, single parent household. My mom was the main provider. My parents divorced at a very early age. And I could always just remember as a kid wanting and yearning for that relationship with my father. It wasn't easy. I've experienced my set of heartbreak because of that relationship. And I think what it did was it caused me to want to seek relationship and validation from outside. So my dating history, listen, I done been through it all, you name it. Been cheated on, been had a baby on, been like all of the things you can think about, verbal abuse, physical abuse. But I stuck around because I really wanted that father type relationship and also acceptance. It caused me to not make the best of choices. And, I definitely made some mistakes going into it. But what I can say is that when I did come to Christ, it was like, listen, God has been consistent. I'm also seeking that love. My mom has always been a woman of faith. So we used to go to church with my mom. However, it was kind of like, my mom would force us. It's like, what are we gonna do, stay in the house? We can't stay in the house, so like we gotta go to church. So it was one of those things where I just kind of grew up in the church and had built a community and a family within the church, but I can't say that church went outside of Sundays. Like when I went home, it was like back to my regular life. It was like, okay, God, we gonna check in with you on Sunday. When something's going wrong, I'm gonna pray to you. But it wasn't like a lifestyle. It wasn't like a personal relationship. It was more so my mom had a relationship. We've always been in church. And so while I'm here, okay, cool, we go praise, and pray, but not necessarily on like the day-to-day. As I got older and my mom, she was more open about us seeking our own personal relationship with God, I started actually seeking to find a church on my own, right? So the churches that my mom would bring us to were like Haitian churches, and like even though I do speak Creole, I don't know all those like big like words. So I would get lost in like the message or the word, like what are they talking about? So I never really felt like I could connect. But the older that I got, my mom was like, hey, I want you all to, me and my siblings, to have our own relationship with God. And so she allowed us to explore, right? And to go out and seek a church community that we felt resonated with us. And so I did. A few of my friends and I, we found a church that, we were able to grow and learn in the Word. Our pastor at the time, our late pastor at the time, he would really take us in to his office. We would have Bible study. He would teach us about the Word, but then also he had a way of connecting it to our lives and what we were going through. And that was so key for me because I'd always just thought of this world, right, that just existed in the Bible. But I was always like, how does this make sense to where I'm at in my life, right? Or what I'm dealing with. Y'all talking about some of these old men in the Bible, like, I don't know, I can't see how I relate. But the way that he broke it down, and he broke down the scripture, and also the way that he was organic and authentic and vulnerable about some of the struggles that he had faced, it allowed me to see God in a different way. But a few years into going into that church, I got baptized, I got saved, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And I thought everything was gonna be cool after that. I was like, oh, I'm saved, life is about to be lit, it's on and popping. I'm about to be off of the sidewalk and into the church for real. And then about a year and a half after that, my pastor passed away. And that was big for me because my pastor had now become this father figure to me, something that I hadn't had, right? And it's like, okay, although I'm growing in my relationship with God, it meant so much to me to actually have a physical presence of a man in my life who could look over me, who could watch over me, who could pray over me, and just teach me things. So when he passed away, I kind of felt like, God, why would you do that? Like, I already don't have my father in my life, who he isn't as present. And now the one man who did step up and wished to show me a different way, he got taken away from me. So I'm not gonna lie, that did create somewhat of a confusing, season in my life, in my walk with God, because I started to feel like, oh, nothing is consistent. If I love someone too deeply, or if I love someone, too openly, there's a chance that they could be taken away, And so I had this weird relationship where I was kind of half in, half out. I would give a little, but not too much, so my heart would get broken. And so that's kind of the same relationship that I had with God. Is that like, well, God, how do I know that you're even consistent, right? If I put my all in you and I put my love in you, at any moment I felt like he could leave me. At the time, I didn't know that that was not true, but that's just what was going on in my young mind. After my pastor passed away, we got into some things. We was back on the sidewalk. I almost dipped my toe in the street a little bit too, because again, I went back to now searching for that love, searching for that relationship with a male figure. I went through my fair share of bad relationships. And here's the thing, like growing up, I considered myself to be pretty aware. I knew that the relationship that my mother and my father had was not a healthy relationship. Even at the age of like 5, 6, I was like, this doesn't seem right. I don't think this is how a relationship should be. I said, I'm not gonna do this, I'm not gonna do that, right? Easier said than done, right? I thought I knew it all. I was like, oh yeah, I'm never gonna find myself in an abusive relationship. I'm never gonna be with someone who doesn't love me. But guess what? That's exactly what I found myself in. And so when I started realizing that the patterns that I was seeing in my relationships of abuse, verbal, physical, sexual, all of these things were patterns that my mom too had faced. And the older I got and I started seeing this sequence, I was like, it's gonna take more than just awareness for me to break these chains. Like, I'm going to need God. I got into my first relationship. That one was horrendous. I don't even know why I stayed that long, but also I know why I stayed that long. I stayed in that relationship for about 3 years, 4 years, on and off, again, physical, verbal abuse, done had a baby on me, all of the things, right? Was the first one to like introduce me, to like a sexual relationship. And that also became a pattern too, where I started seeing that the only way that started feeling like the only way that I could be loved was if I, gave the cookies away, or if I engaged in sexual activities with my partners. I started feeling like, oh yeah, my identity is that I have to be like this sensual person, or I have to be this overly sexual person, because that's the only way that I'm going to get loved. That was the only times that I really saw that affection, And so I started to attach that to my identity, thinking that, oh yeah, I go into this relationship, okay, yeah, like that needs to happen, or that has to happen in order for him to love me. That also led me down the road to identity issues of like figuring out who I am. So I went to Rutgers University and I had a dual major in psychology and journalism and communications. I started doing radio, started doing red carpet. I was at the events. I also was producing my own web series. So life was lit, you know what I'm saying? I was out here like, I was, rubbing shoulders with those who were in the industry, while at the same time, behind the scenes, I was dealing with all of these issues with like identity and abuse, right? That I felt like I had to mask. I could not let people see me going through what I was going through. So it almost felt like I was living like this double life. It's just like, okay, in the public, I'm all good, like, you know what I'm saying? Have the biggest smile on my face. And then I go home and, you know, I'm having to deal with like abuse and then like, you know, like rub it off and then go back out there. And so a lot of people didn't know a lot of the things that I was going through. Definitely not my mom, not my siblings, not my parents, some of my friends maybe, but there really wasn't much that they could do at that time. While I was in the industry and I still had God there. Like I still needed his presence. I still would turn to my father, but the relationship wasn't as strong at the time. Being in that field, there were times where I felt like I didn't know who I was. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. It was a lot of days where I questioned my voice. And so while I still had God on the side, I can't quite say that I fully had a relationship with him. I knew of God. I knew that, you know, he was real, but I just didn't know him for myself yet. And so being in an industry, right, where you have so many different influences in your life, I felt like I couldn't fully bring God into the picture. And I'll never forget, there was a program going on, and it was for young female entrepreneurs, those who wanted to be in the industry. You had journalists, marketing coordinators, you had all types, right, from all different backgrounds. And it basically was this program for young women to seek mentorship and guidance. And I was like, I definitely need that. So I remember auditioning for this program. And I remember that I made it to the second stage, and we had to sit in front of one of a panel of judges, and we basically had to share our story. And I won't forget this one judge who was a pretty prominent figure in the industry. She is well known. I started sharing my story. I think the question that she asked was, what has been your greatest accomplishment in life? And I remember telling her about my show and like all the things that I had accomplished, but I remember mentioning that I couldn't have done any of these things without God. And she let me finish. After, you know, I did that whole audition, she came to me afterwards and was like, you know, you have a really beautiful story, and I can truly see your personality. However, you might want to be careful about bringing God into certain conversations, because you never know if the person there shares the same beliefs, shares the same, you know, ideas, and so you might want to hold back on mentioning that. And I just remember being like in shock, like I can't bring God into the conversation, even though I said like I couldn't have accomplished any of those things without God. And so again, I was already battling with identity and also wanting to be liked, right? Wanting people's approval. So that even further caused me to push God to the side. I said, okay, well, God, maybe you can wait in the car. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe like we could partner and all that, but like I can't bring you in the room, right? And so it was like the more I went deeper into the industry, the further my relationship with God began to pull back, until I found myself at a point where, honestly, I felt lost. I felt like my voice was no longer my voice. I felt like the environments that I found myself in, let me say something, these industry events, you don't gotta pay for nothing. It's open bar and child, I was in there. Okay, now I was in the street, okay? Before I was in the sidewalk, I was dipping my toe in and out. I was in the streets, okay? And it just felt so easy, but there was always a part of me that was just like, I didn't quite feel like I connected with that. And so fast forward, I was deep into it, like drinking, like late nights in the studios, you know, putting out content that truly I didn't even recognize. I was just like, why am I doing this? Or why am I having these conversations? Why am I in this space? I had a lot of those moments where I'll be like, how did I get here? Like, how am I in this space with these people? But that just became my life. As I'm going through this, imposter syndrome is really starting to sink in. I found myself mixing and mingling with the wrong people. Why? Because the spirit of discernment was no longer on me. Like, I felt like I was so into it. There were people who, pretended to have good intentions, who did not have the best intentions. Long story short, I ended up losing everything. I lost my studio space where I was recording my show. I lost, at the time, I was working with a team of producers. I had lost that business connection. I had lost friends. I had lost in relationships. Like, literally everything just felt like it was being stripped from me at the same time. And I found myself in a pretty dark place. I was experiencing like panic attacks, anxiety attacks. Like, anytime I went into a room where there was people in the industry, even though I knew those people, I would hide in a corner because it was like I just felt like I did not belong in that space. And so there was a season where God removed me from it altogether. And I was so scared because I was like, no, like, this is who I am. Like, I'm Sasha Nicole. Like, I'm you know what I'm saying? I need to be in the mix. But it became too much. It became too overwhelming. It became like I couldn't even leave the house, right? Or even be in these events. I remember even trying to get ready to go to certain events. I would have so much anxiety. I would literally have to talk myself into going, to the point where I couldn't even go anymore. I would feel so uncomfortable. And so, although I felt like I was in my purpose, like, I do feel like God's purpose for me and plans for me was to use my voice and to influence those spaces, I wasn't doing that because I had taken him out of the equation, right? I started doing things on my own. And so when God removed me, honestly, it had been years. Like, so then again, mind you, my relationship with him wasn't that strong. So now at this time, I'm like, God, you done taken my spiritual father from me. You done taken my show. You done taken my, my influence, right? So like, what else do I have? And so I found myself in this space of consecration with God. And over the course of maybe 3 years, it was just me and him. And at first it was uncomfortable. At first it was like, well, God, what you want me to say? Because I'm kind of mad at you right now, and like, I don't really want to speak to you. But I say that period of consecration was so important because it really helped to strengthen my relationship with God. He began to speak to me about, some of the ideas and the mindsets that I had about life, about relationships, about myself, and who I thought I was and who I needed to be. And he started to restore that with who he said I was. I no longer began to think of myself as, oh, this person who was undeserving of love, or this person who had to fight for love, because that was a big narrative for me. I always felt like I had to prove myself. I always felt like I needed to go the extra mile just for people to love me. Like, it always had to be a reason for people to love me, not just me showing up as myself. Like, I didn't feel like that was good enough. And so he began speaking to me about who I was, and I began going more into my word. I didn't have like a church that I was going to at the time. This was just literally me in my quiet time with God, like just me and him. Quiet, nobody else. There even became a point where I had to separate myself from certain friends that I thought were my friends for life, who were going to be, in my life for a while. I had to separate myself because those environments were no longer beneficial for me. And over time, I ain't gonna say it was easy, y'all. It was definitely some pruning. There was definitely some hard discussions that I had to have with myself of like, why do you think this way? And I also like to say that God, during this process, God introduced me to therapy. And so I began seeing a therapist because I realized that there was a very heavy, trauma from growing up and like my past that I really needed to dig out. And again, I didn't have a church to help me do this. A lot of this was a lot of self-work and, work with God, but I didn't have any other resources at the time. So pandemic happened and, everybody was in the house. Nobody was going nowhere. So it was like, at that time, I was also yearning for a church home. I was like, okay, God, this is cool, but I've been here for a while. Like, I've been by myself with me and you, for a little bit. I really would like community. And so I started praying over that. And I was so blessed that I actually was going through social media one day, and a friend of mine had posted about the church that I go to now, All Nations, and I was like, oh, that church looks like really lit. I was like, I think that, maybe there's something there for me. But I kept hesitating. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go, but I just never made the move. And then one day, I just remember it was like, Sasha, you have to get up. I know you felt comfortable being in this space, right? But like, you have to actually get up and go out. And so I did. And honestly, the rest is history. It's been almost 3 years now, and All Nations has become my home. It's also a place where I've been able to serve, and through my serving, God has restored sort of my creative ideas and juices, and I feel him pushing me back into that space. I know better now. I know that I can't do this without God. I don't care what the world say. I don't care who I want him to be in the room. He's gonna be in the room, okay? So now I'm moving forward in partnership with God, with a deeper connection, with a deeper relationship with God. I had to go through this pruning process. I had to go through this season of consecration because there were so many influences going on when it came to even trusting my voice. I was like, oh, I was hearing from this person. I should wear this. I should be doing this. This is who I need to be. When that's not what God said. Like, so what if you're the one that's standing out? So what if you don't look like everyone else, or you're not talking like everyone else? That's not who God called you to be. I'm finding my voice again. Well, I found my voice again. And so I know that when I'm going out into, whatever God has for me next, I know that it's truly me, right? And I know that it's me and him together in this partnership. I think the thing that is allowing me to remain in this space of, deep fellowship with God was that season of consecration. He literally needed to remove all distractions, because I'm a little hard-headed, you guys, like, to be honest. Like, you could tell me one thing, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this. But literally during that time, he stripped everything away. Like, when I say I had no excuse to say, oh, I need to do this or do, like, literally. And then the pandemic, where are you going? Nobody's going anywhere. So like, okay, it's just me and you. So I had no excuses. I had nothing else to fall back on to say, oh, God, I can't do this right now because I have this. He said, what's your excuse now? That season of consecration really helped me to, I think our pastor says this, to unlearn and relearn. I needed to silence the voices that had been speaking to me for so long, that had created these systems and these mindsets and these habits, to be honest. I needed to strip that away, and I needed to rebuild a stronger foundation. And so that season, it had to be that long, because not only did I have to unlearn, but I also had to build better habits. I can literally feel when there are times where maybe, because life happens, right? Where you get busy and things happen, you're being pulled from left to right. I can literally feel when I haven't spent time with God, I feel it in my body. I feel it in my soul, right? And I'm just like, I have to stop everything and say, okay, I need to go spend some time with God. I will literally say that now. Like, before, that was not a thing. Like, I'll be like, oh no, I gotta go out with my friends, I gotta do this. Like, I will literally tell my friends, not today. I'm sorry, I really just need to spend some time with me and God. And I love that for me. But it was that season of that alone time with God that really helped to build. I feel him pushing me back into that space of creativity again, but this time partnering with him on the journey.
So what would you say, one, to women who was in that place of being lost, that place of trying to find like fulfillment in men, and even staying when it wasn't for them? And then part two, what would you say to people now who are trying to have a relationship with God, right? But they feel they have to put him to the side. So it's almost like half in, half out.
To first understand love at its full capacity, you have to know the love that God has for you. I know it's so easy to do it the opposite way, because we are creatures, right? We're physical, right? We need to see it in front of us in order to believe it. That was me. I'm like, God, how can the person who's in front of me, the person who birthed me, right, or the person I'm in a relationship with who's physically here with me, how can they not love me? And then I'm supposed to expect you to love me? I just didn't understand the concept. But truly, if you understand the love that God has for you, which is agape love, all of the other relationships, you'll be able to sift out what's real and what's not. You'll be able to identify the real from the fake. That it truly is such a sweet love. So I would say seek God first. Seek that relationship with him first, and everything else will fall into place. His love is just as tangible as someone sitting right next to you. It's probably even better. So I would definitely say take the time to build that relationship with God and come to know him. And don't be afraid to bring him in the room with you. He's not just this person you go to on Sundays, or that you just spend time in your quiet hours with. You literally, he is everywhere. He is omnipresent. When I began to realize that, it helped me in my journey. I needed to understand that God was literally in everything. Every physical thing, the wind, the grass, the sounds of nature, like everything is God. And so when I began to think about it like that, I was like, oh God, you're always around. You're literally everywhere. How can I not take you with me? You were in the car. Like you're everywhere. Like, and so when I started to unlearn and relearn things, that like, no, God isn't just someone you can just put to the side. He's everywhere and anywhere that you go. And so partnering with him will only, just sweeten the journey for you, will just sweeten. And having him there as an advocate, when I tell you, like, listen, he's the best business partner. Like, he is the best coach. He is the best motivator. He is the best listener. Like, he literally is all of the things in one. So you really have this, like, giant of a support literally on your side. So you got the best of the best. He cares about the same things that you care about. He is concerned about the same things that you are concerned about. And so if you have someone who can advocate for you and be in your corner, why not him?